Len and Duncan, why don't you guys introduce yourselves and talk about, what is it you guys do and what's your background?
My name is Len Ber.
A little closer.
I'm formerly a physician from the USSR, from the former USSR. I specialized in. I was a medical doctor, specialized in endocrinology. Came over here in '93 to work for a pharmaceutical company and in the area of my research. And then I was prepared to get licensed in the States, but things on the business side took over, and I stayed on the business side, and currently working in the regulatory field for a company in Chicago area. U.S. naturalized citizen, married, and been target of directed energy weapons since 2019.
Since 2019?
Yeah, in the summer of 2019.
3 years ago.
Just over 3 years ago, it started happening to me. And was diagnosed in 2020 with vestibular dysfunction due to directed energy exposure by the same team of experts that diagnosed Cuban diplomats.
Duncan?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I have an Ivy League background, education, and I've been studying and human rights activism for what is now currently termed Havana syndrome, but this has been going on for quite some time. I worked for DARPA on projects for the CIA, for the Navy, for example, wrote the Artificial Intelligence Code, tracked the Soviet nuclear submarine fleet. But about 20 years ago, I realized some of my research was being utilized on my own citizens. And that was unacceptable to me. And since then, I've done hundreds of interviews, interviewed 2,500 victims or targeted individuals, as they're called, found commonalities of all their stories. And I've spoken to with the head of the LA FBI, to the Senate Intelligence Committee, 23 senators and representatives, with some interest. And I said, just wait when it starts happening to their agents, diplomats, and the FBI. So interestingly, a story came out yesterday that it's happening to the FBI now.
What is your educational background?
I have an MBA from Dartmouth, a Master's of Science from Harvard, PhD in Applied Sciences, Computer Science, Artificial Intelligence, pre-medical in engineering, and other classes from Stanford, Duke, and MIT. So yeah, I've been in school most of my life.
And how did you get into working with DARPA and the CIA?
It was odd. I gave a resume to a headhunter, ironically, and they're called headhunters, and my head was taken for a CIA think tank. At the time, I didn't know it. It was a technology think tank, and it was all funded by DARPA. And then I got shuffled around as a scientist to these various other projects.
For people who aren't familiar, could you tell us what DARPA is?
Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. They do all of the pie in the sky projects, long-term, well-funded. I have some of the best scientists, and it's mainly where all the top secret research goes on. And that some of it I can talk about, some of it I can't, and it's a very fine line. I'm not trying to hurt my country. I'm not trying to hurt anyone here, but there is a cover-up going on about the Havana syndrome. And so this is what we're hoping Len and I to expose today.
So when did you guys meet each other? And how did you guys meet?
So after I was diagnosed with Havana syndrome by Dr. Hardvard at the University of Miami, I started reaching out to elected officials, to all the researchers. One of the people I contacted gave me Robert's book, Soulcatcher, Project Soulcatcher. I read it, and I said, I have to meet this guy. And I contacted him on social media and made a trip. I live in the Chicago area, just about 45 minutes from downtown, and contacted Robert, asked to fly to meet him, and we flew to Idaho and spent the day talking, and I learned a lot about it, and I continue learning from Robert. We became friends, and we have common goal to expose this.
So how did you first develop this syndrome? What was happening? What were you doing? You were a civilian. You weren't working in the government
Right.
in any capacity. So how does this happen to a civilian?
It just started happening. I developed tinnitus, the ring in the ear, first at like in certain parts of the house, and I heard noises and voices, and I could not figure out, and then vibrations. These vibrations, experientially, it's like nothing else. There's no neurological disorder that feels like that. And I can tell you, as a patient and as a physician, experientially, it is very distinct. Your whole body vibrates. Your head is heavy pressure. The sound is deafening. You get disoriented. Can't walk. Can't talk. It incapacitates you, and it can last from 10 minutes to 30 minutes to an hour and a half, and it's very painful. It's very uncomfortable, and it feels like concussion. After that, and you actually have symptoms of concussion, the movement of the eyes, nystagmus, and this is why some people give it the name immaculate concussion. But it was escalating. I was searching for an answer. I had convulsions from it, which is one of the things that people experience. I realized how serious it was. Neurologists were unable to diagnose. I started looking through the literature, found a paper by Dr. Hardvard where he describes 25 diplomats that he examined and diagnosed with what he called acquired neurosensory dysfunction. And that's the diagnosis that he gave to these diplomats. And he gave this diagnosis to me. But my attacks did not happen overseas. They happened domestically in my house. And I traveled and stayed at hotels, went to other states, and it was happening there too. So it's just not one location. And it escalated. Then I was diagnosed with traumatic encephalopathy, basically like post-traumatic brain syndrome. But there's no injury. There's no concussion. This is not a type of injury where you have mechanical trauma.
Right.
This is energy. This is what they call non-kinetic weaponry. And this is how we met.
why would somebody like you be targeted? What were you doing? Were you dealing with other people in government or diplomats, or do you have any reason to suspect that somebody would target you with something like this?
None. I have no idea why I was chosen to be targeted, and I keep no government secrets. I never worked for a government. I don't know what the reason is, and I'm not doing it. So perhaps people who do it to me would know the answer.
So is this something that you believe happened to you one time and it had like a lasting residual effect? Or do you think this is something that happened, you were targeted by some sort of weapon or something multiple times?
Multiple times on ongoing basis. I just had 2 attacks this morning before I got on the plane. These are active attacks. And experientially, they feel exactly the same. The vibrations, all the symptoms are the same. And not only that, I have a brain scan that I did in April and did in October. So in 6 months, what this Havana syndrome is also described as brain connectivity disorder. So it disrupts connectivity between neural nodes within the brain. And I have these broken connections, these called delta waves, that you only supposed to have it during deep sleep. And I have them all over, and these are basically non-functional connections between neural nodes. And since April to October of this year, I have 20% more. There's no degenerative neurological disorder that behaves that like that. This is a very fast progress, and because I'm having these daily active attacks. These are not functional episodes. These are active attacks that make me vibrate, make me disoriented. They're extremely painful. Sometimes I just have to go to the basement and scream in the pillow. It's extremely debilitating. I've been on medical leave for the last year, and it's hard for me to do any cognitive work. I work when I can.
So when you say it's actively happening, you think that this is being something that's controlled, or do you think it is something that just has an effect that lasts over a long period of time and it happens sporadically at random times?
I think that these are active attacks. These are not residual. These are not functional episodes.
So their episodes are not random.
No, I can't predict when they're gonna happen. They can happen. It can wake me up in the middle of the night. It can happen.
There's no pattern.
There's no pattern. When you listen to neuroweapon experts that warn us about these attacks, they call them intentional. So these are intentional attacks. These are not, the brain does not produce them. There's a school of thought that these are functional neurological disorder, but in fact, the brain injury from these energy attacks are classified as organic. So there's a damage to the brain. So to answer this question scientifically would take somebody to measure that energy coming into my brain, but the detection methods in the intelligence reports are classified. So I can't tell you that this energy is coming in because I'm not measuring it. Nobody is measuring, nobody is investigating it. But I guarantee you these are active attacks. I'm the biggest skeptic. I'm scientifically minded. I have no doubt that these are active attacks.
There was a recent documentary on CNN, Immaculate Conception, where the doctor who was investigating, it was CIA, came down with the same symptoms. So it's kind of interesting. The doctors they hired that they are not even allowed to know.
Talk directly into that thing.
That they do not even know that we've been working on the same weapons, directed energy weapons, often referred to as mind control weapons. Chinese are working on them. The Russians and U.S. have had them for a long time. But dial-in lethality that is what's happening oftentimes for those that show mild traumatic brain injury. It can be done through cavitation effects using sound waves, highly unlikely in the Cuban embassy attacks. And it can be done through microwave-directed energy if it's amplified. In fact, there's something called the Frey effect. The Army had it on their website called V2K, and that's how a lot of people refer to it, that can pipe voices into someone's head. You can't plug your ears. It actually vibrates the brain, which is like many concussions, through the small pulses that expand the tissue and then contracts it, then goes to the inner ear where they can hear it. If you just turn that up, it causes brain damage. You're heating the brain. So there are a lot of ways, and a weapon, for example, that I think is reclassified now, but it was done at the University of Nevada as a non-lethal weapon that resonates the dopamine cells of your brain, producing cells of your brain, and it floods it. Now, it worked. The Air Force reclassified it.
Flood your brain with dopamine?
Yeah, dopamine dump. And that incapacitates the adversary in a non-lethal way. Not totally non-lethal, though. If you have too much neurotransmitter in your brain, it's a neurotoxin. It'll also cause brain damage. So brain damage can occur through these weapons that are non-lethal in many different ways.
Do you have any way of describing, or is there any evidence anywhere that could explain something that's happening, like to describe what Len is describing is happening to him? Is there any sort of weapon that you're aware of that can do that?
Sure. It's very complex. But if you cognitively model someone, you have a brain print, like a fingerprint. And if you use autocorrelation techniques, and there's a way, and we'll just kind of wave our hand, functional MRI that you can do at a distance over the earth, you have every human being's brain pattern. You can control 8 billion brains on the planet, potentially, read them. Pre-crime, I mean, you can imagine during warfare, it'd be useful for a number of objectives. So in that situation, you'd want it continuous, and you'd beam the entire earth over it. You're like a cell phone. Your brain is a circuit. So if you're dialed in, once you have a cognitive model, you would never be able to escape it under the magnetosphere or ionosphere. It's worldwide. And you can ask, a number of people in every country, is it happening in your country? And they're just like the exact same symptomology.
Other than the symptomology and the vast amount of people in government and so forth that experience these same symptoms, what other evidence do we have of technology like this? Well,
I sent you some articles and papers. There are just many books. You can go on Google. The difference between, I just don't believe these diplomats are being hit by a drive-by microwave weapon. I think the brain damage is being done because the brain rewires itself more rapidly. Let's say if you lose your eyesight, then your hearing and taste, smell, your taste and smell get better. Your brain adapts faster. During this adaptation process, you can insert an external signal, sort of like hiving brains together.
Insert an external signal.
Yes, an electromagnetic signal. And how would you do that, you might ask? And the details get very complex. But there are several patents that you can access that talk about inserting a signal into the microcircuits and macrocircuits of the brain. Now, you got to know those patterns, the lock and key mechanism. Otherwise, it won't affect you. It will only affect the target brain if the brain print fits.
The brain print.
Yes, signature. Everyone has a unique one. And you ask, well, how do you broadcast this over the world? How do we talk to nuclear submarines underwater?
How do you explain this is happening to Len? How do you rationalize it?
I can, because one, it follows the symptomology, like I said, of all these others. Right. But for me, I don't know if he wants me to mention this. Let me ask him in private. Hold on.
Okay, yeah.
Can I talk? Here's how I do my studies, and I wanted to find the commonalities, but I have to throw away the ones I'm uncertain about that are true targets. You know, maybe there's natural schizophrenia, there's a whole bunch of chemical imbalances, et cetera.
Right.
These weapons can actually induce and mimic all those diseases and effects. But the conversations, the scripts, they're called, are always the same. I've heard them all. They're slightly tailored for each individual, but they're scripts. And they're meant to confuse the very derogatory. That's just typical breakdown. If you've ever been to boot camp, you're a worm until you're part of the team. And why would you want to break down the ego of that person? To rebuild it. So this gets into creating Manchurian candidates, split personality spies, and information couriers, people that will carry messages to other places without being aware that they're actually doing it. So you can imagine the misperception that is caused by this. And a lot of people, the targets when they're interviewed are tricked into believing evil aliens have abducted their brains, demons.
They're tricked.
Yes.
How are they tricked? Pardon this brief interruption, but I want to take a minute to talk about this incredible supplement that I've been using for over a year now after it was recommended to me by nutritional scientist Dr. Dominic D'Agostino on this podcast. I take Dom's advice when it comes to anything related to nutrition, diet, and longevity, because as we get older, these things become more and more important. That is why I started using Verso. Verso is a company that is dedicated to translating scientific breakthroughs into products that hold the potential to increase longevity. I take Cell Being, this one right here, which contains nicotinamide mononucleotide or NMN-based supplement, paired with naturally derived micronized trans resveratrol and TMG. These two chemicals are actually precursors to what's called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which is commonly known as NAD. And NAD is essentially the precursor to energy, cell repair, and longevity. If you've ever tried fasting or even intermittent fasting and you've gotten that feeling of super high energy or mental clarity, it's because your body is activating these genes called sirtuins, which are actually longevity genes. The downside is as we age, NAD declines. When I found out I could naturally increase my body's activation of sirtuins and naturally activate my body's production of NAD, I was sold. And it is so much more affordable than doing NAD IV drips. Head on over to ver.io TIs-V2K and use the coupon code concrete at checkout to save 15% on your entire order. That's KONCRETE at checkout and get 15% off your entire order, or you can just go to ver.so/KONCRETE. It's linked below. Back to the show.
They're told.
By who?
By the voices, the V2K. So they'll say, we're the Russian government, we're the Chinese government, we're evil aliens, we're Satan's, satanic ritual abuse. And I've heard all the stories. One guy believed it was some 14-year-old kid with an Xbox that lived next door. The trickery really is that great when you're under hypnosis that people will believe something other than a massive government could do this. And so anyway, my interview with Len, he very well described a typical breakdown script that's used on almost all the TI victims. TI stands for targeted individuals. Some of them are pretty crazy. They have names like Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, and those are the confusion tactics. And when they're breaking down the ego of the human through all the pains and tortures and the verbal breakdown, these are typical CIA torture scripts. I mean, Kubark manual. And they do good cop, bad cop interrogation called Jeff and Mutt, and they go right through the list, right? Just textbook. So whoever the handlers are on the other side of this synthetic telepathy, they're following the handbook perfectly, and they've been trained.
But why Len?
And everyone asks that. Why me? Every target. So sometimes they come up, I cut some important guy off in traffic. He put me on a list, or it's my ex-husband, or something like that. If you work for government, you're just like, well, obviously it's the government. But right. You want a random sample of the population in all languages, all cultures, in order for a worldwide weapon of an AI system that can interact with every human brain. For example, when you develop a new drug, well, you have a control group, and then you give the placebo, and then you have the actual drug experiment in order to do a double-blind study. Right. So why me? I'm nobody. Well, that's exactly probably why they chose you.
Right, but if they're doing some sort of an experiment like this and testing him, how would they gather information? How would they know about Len's symptoms and know how Len is feeling? How would they know it's working?
You want to answer that?
Yeah, I believe that there is it's a two-way, bidirectional connection. And once again, it's called remote neural monitoring and intervention. There are patents around it. Plus, the medical information that I produce is probably very relevant to them if it is, in fact, human experimentation without consent, which violates Nuremberg, Geneva Convention, every human right. But that's a speculation on my part because I'm not the one doing it. It's been done to me, and I don't know why. I don't know who is doing it. What the purpose is, I can only speculate.
And let me interject here. So a lot of a few of the targets were true Manchurian candidates. I tried to speak with Senator Clinton at the time. She wouldn't talk to us. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up to her is because someone was hearing her voice, ventriloquism, and they believed she was the one torturing them. And that's how you program, they're called programmed assassins. And I thought she might be interested in that. And so if you're programming someone to go after, let's say, a political target, all you have to do is use voice morphing and pipe in the tortures, the pains, and 24 hours, make it a artificial intelligence chatterbot too, and you'll drive the person crazy, and they'll want to kill and stop the pain of the target, which they'll go after that person, be it their neighbor, be it a lot of these school shootings. I think that you hear about on the news. They hear voices, and the news, the mass news media will just write them out. Oh, they're crazy.
There's a story apparently about people seeing a white van, or what? Let me just ask you this: what do the people who claim that Havana syndrome is like some fake thing that's like created by
mass hysteria,
schizophrenics or whatever, talking about crazy things? What sort of arguments are they making?
They're using a pseudoscience that's kind of a tautology of psychiatry. If we find an abnormality in a person, we then classify it, and then it becomes a disease, a mental illness. Now, the problem with that is if we're trying to hide a very sophisticated weapon, one that actually targets the mind, there's no way to use that model of science to explain it. You immediately are discrediting it. You're being a skeptic. You're not finding the alternative hypotheses. So the people that say these things, one, it hasn't been done to them. They haven't worked on the weaponry. They haven't done their research. And it's a kind of a lazy mind. They just rather say everyone's crazy, mass delusion, they think the sky is falling, etc. And that's just, I don't, since I know they exist, and I've studied this for 20 years and worked on portions of it, I have very bad things to say about those people.
Now, when you worked on programs for DARPA and the CIA, what sort of you worked on neurotechnology? Is that right?
Again, we're getting into a fine line about my background, what I talk about, but EEG controlled robots, it's a project, robotic surgery and medicine, voice identification and morphing technologies, natural language processing, signal intelligence of tanks from satellites, things like that. But I can't talk directly about too much about the very details of the advanced sensors and systems involved, if you can appreciate that.
Well, some of the greatest innovation in technology obviously comes from war and the military industrial complex. Are there any positive aspects of neurotechnology and this type of technology that are being utilized or that are being developed?
Oh, absolutely. If we go throughout history, all technologies are neutral. Fire can cook food, kill bacteria, keep you warm, but it can burn down villages. So the war machine will almost always use it first for their advantage and keep it as secret as possible. It's a great interrogation tool. Imagine having bloodless wars where you just fatigue your enemy and they drop to their knees. We use the voice to skull and LDAR long-range acoustic device in the Gulf War to say this is all lay down your arms, and they believed it.
So what is that? Can you explain exactly what that is? The LRAD?
LRAD is a sonic long-range acoustic weapon. The V2K is a microwave weapon. You can't plug your eardrums. You can't stop the sound.
It conducts straight to your brain.
Yeah, and it makes it sound like it's coming, the sound or voice or music or whatever you want to play is coming right from the center of your head. So it works pretty well in war, and you can imagine other effects. You're getting brutalized, beaten up, all virtual. And The brain damage, unfortunately, they're going to have to work on that. But otherwise, you can literally traumatize an entire population. Okay, so are those good effects rather than guns? Perhaps. But there are other good effects. Imagine once the civilians have use of this, like Elon Musk's Neuralaser, you can have more control of yourself. I feel like I want to be happy today, or I want to have a communication with you without using a phone. So synthetic telepathy is really around the corner. We have to get the messaging infrastructure working.
What are your thoughts on Elon Musk's Neuralink? What is your outlook on that?
I think he's going to be set up as a patsy for a lot of this experimentation that's going on in the public. I've already seen it happening. Targeted individuals are very angry. They want to point the finger at somebody. He's the perfect person to point the finger at. He's a rich man, so he's already suspect in some people's minds, even though this technology is very old, very old.
What the Neuralink technology?
Yeah.
Really? How old is it?
I can track back at least synthetic telepathy or piping voices into people's head right around Kennedy's assassination, but about 1958 was the earliest target I could find.
And who was this? What was the situation? Can you explain this specific incident?
Exactly like Len Ber's. Same thing. He wrote about it in a book. I don't remember the title of it exactly. It really seemed to come online with a bunch of people in about 1976, the bicentennial of this nation. And there seems to be increases in the number of people that have these complaints given bigger military budgets. Now, why there's a correlation there, I don't know. You'll have to make your own speculation. But this isn't new. Havana Syndrome is not new by any means. It has a new name. It's getting recognition by the news. But honestly, it's been squelched. It's been covered up for many, many decades.
Do you know if Elon has any sort of government contracts with Neuralink?
No. As far as I know, he does not.
Okay.
He'll be approached, obviously, but what I think they're doing, like some of the projects I worked on in my time at DARPA, became real big companies like Google and Facebook and et cetera. So I think it's a technology transfer. They can help civilian scientists, come up with the ideas to make it look like it's new. And not the other way around, that the universities came up with it and then it's then they bought it from them. So I think I hope Elon actually succeeds, because then this isn't imaginary stuff anymore. People will then see, wow, we can really connect brains together and make hyper intelligence. I sent you that article from Duke University, a video of how they put brain chips, and you don't need brain chips, but that's one technology, into 3 monkeys, connected their cerebral cortex. And in this experiment, they could prove that 3 monkey brains together acted intuitively as one brain and was able to solve a problem that the individual monkeys were not able to solve. And that's a really important finding. Now, can we extend that to an entire population and help solve the world's problems? We can't even fathom what a larger mind would look like. It's certainly not human.
Wasn't there another experiment done where they connected like a human and a human brain and a monkey's brain?
There was. How do you know about that one?
I heard about it. I don't remember where I heard about it. I was a girl.
Yes, and an ape. The Army experiment, I think it was in the 60s.
I might have heard you talk about it.
Well, maybe. And it didn't end well. What they were trying to do is cybernetically link, and that's the term when you connect.
Who was doing this study?
It was the Army and one other group, and I can't remember. And they were hoping, because they didn't break down it all comes together, so give me a chance here. They weren't able to break down the ego of the ape or the girl per se. So their brains,
the what?
The young girl that was used as an experiment.
They weren't able to break down what?
The ego.
Ego, okay.
So sense of self. We all have a sense of self.
Right.
We believe we're separated from everybody else. And even though we have two hemispheres of the brain, we believe we're one brain.
Right.
You know, it's an illusion, optical illusion, delusion of consciousness, as Einstein says. So what happened is when they put the girl in the cage, the ape tore apart. It wasn't able to recognize her as an extension of itself. And I believe this is part of the reason of the breakdown, the torture that TIs are experiencing, is they have to break down the ego in order to be part of a greater mind or mind controlled.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it is. A worldwide global brain.
Now, Len, how many people have you spoken with or met that are experiencing the same symptoms that you're experiencing?
Hundreds.
And when you went down to, was it Miami when you met with the doctor? How many people has he seen that he's diagnosed, and how specifically did he diagnose you? And were there any other neurological diseases that were similar or in the same realm as Havana syndrome? Or did he actually diagnose you with quote unquote Havana syndrome?
He diagnosed me with acquired neurosensory dysfunction. Okay. And that's the name of the paper that he published about Havana syndrome. So if you read it, he talks about 25 symptomatic.
Maybe you can pull this up, Austin. What's his name?
Hoffer. Acquired.
Dr. Hoffer of the University of Miami.
Yeah. So he examined 25 symptomatic patients medevaced from Cuba and 10 of their roommates, because these attacks never happened at the embassy. It always happened at the hotel or living quarters, and they were in the same room.
They never happened at the embassy. That's interesting.
Never happened at the embassy. So people who experience symptoms, and there could be other people, their roommates, that never experienced it. And so all the people who experienced the symptoms were examined for signs of concussion, and they all had symptoms of concussion, even though they never had any physical trauma to their head. And they all had severe vestibular abnormalities. And the abnormalities were at the level of brain injury, not just variation within the population. Because the criticism was, well, vestibular tests are not really that precise, and some people with anxiety could have vestibular abnormalities, but not to this extent. And Dr. Hoffer really explains it in his lecture, in his paper. Dr. Giordano, who was part of the team, confirms it. Dr. Balaban, who did a test of eye movement by applying this computerized method. And this is how they can tell the Havana syndrome type of damage to the brain from a mechanical concussion. So they're both damage to the brain, but they're different because the mechanism is different.
So there's an eye test where they can tell.
Yeah, correct. The eye movement test.
But the effect of the damage is the same, but there's no physical, like, abrupt, like there's no trauma.
There's no
physical trauma.
There's no mechanical trauma.
Did you mention the quantitative EEG?
Yeah. So the same patients were sent to the University of Pennsylvania and to the trauma center, and they were all done. They performed various tests on them, including fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. There's specific type of MRI that shows connectivity in the brain called DTI, diffusion tensor imaging, and they found abnormalities that, once again, these specialists see in traumatic brain injury. So the doctors who examined these patients, they all in one voice tell us something happened to these patients, and these are the findings. And the findings are they constitute brain injury. The critics of that say this is psychogenic illness, and it's spread like mass hysteria. People under stress develop these sensations, and they all kind of repeat after each other, and their brain kind of develops these patterns. But none of these specialists, and I spoke to Dr. Bartholomew, who co-wrote a book about Havana syndrome being mass hysteria, and he admitted himself in my conversation. He said, if there were findings of brain injury, that would invalidate my hypothesis.
Right.
And so the doctor, but he has never seen a patient with Havana syndrome. But all the doctors that saw the patients say these patients have brain injury findings.
How many civilians are there dealing with the same thing?
I would give, from my estimate, low end, around the world, and this is in every country, that can use the internet, that can contact me, minimum 10,000.
Minimum 10,000
So
civilians.
that means a lot more.
Wow. And how many government workers, or how many FBI, whatever, politicians,
You're
diplomats?
right. The very first CIA agent that came forward and said, I heard these crickets and this sound, and my brain hasn't been the same since. He's gone through the same process as Len Ber. Just block after block of government bureaucracy saying, you're delusional, this technology doesn't exist. And, you don't have to go to the Directed Energy Directorate of the Air Force to know that we've been working on this for a long time with our NATO allies. And so a lot of the work on these concussion weapons, non-lethal weapons, are done under that directorate.
Is anybody transparent about being who in government is being transparent about working on this kind of technology?
Len has stories, but he can't mention names.
Yes,
that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that there was an investigative reporting in Zeit magazine, which is a German publication. They investigated Havana syndrome, and they talked to a prominent expert in the field of directed energy, and who published a short article following the events. And then he was contacted by the DoD and by the Air Forces that that he is not to speak publicly about it. Otherwise, they will pull his funding. And
yeah, that's part of the way that you prevent leaks. Is it's a form of financial blackmail that will pull your funding if you talk about any of this openly. And
Is there any correlation between you and some of the other people that have been experiencing the same thing? Is with timing of the attacks? Like, are the timing of the attacks similar between different people? Are people experiencing them at the same times? How are they being triggered? Specifically, how are they being triggered?
Yeah, it seems the ones that are severe, I call them, targets. Some of it's stress related. You can tell. There was a paper in the late 1970s by the DIA, the Department Intelligence Agency, that said the Russians were trying to create a panic weapon that could kill a person, literally spook them to death by creating a runaway process with the adrenal gland and increasing it till blood pressure, any sort of weakness in their circulatory system, their heart would give out. And anytime we blame the Russians for something like that, we're working on it too. So it seems like oftentimes stress brings it on. And I've read that in some other papers, but otherwise it's constant for these people. 24 hours, constant. And they can't sleep. Which even makes it worse. It weakens the brain. Sleep deprivation is a common torture tactic, interrogation tactic, and it breaks down the will. You're more easily suggestible. He said he has major delta brain waves, which that's a hypnotic state, which makes you more susceptible. And one of the CIA's old weapons was called REHIC, remote hypnotic intracerebral control. A lot of people don't believe they can be hypnotized through, when people think of hypnotism, they think of a watch going back and forth. And no, that's not the actual definition of hypnotism. It's in training the brain. So binaural beats, for example, on headphones, if you're off by 8 hertz, you're in the alpha delta brainwave length, and you'll actually see the brain under an EEG start to mimic that binaural beating. That's hypnotism. Now you can do it on a much grander scale of the macro circuits, the main brain frequencies, or the microcircuits. So synthetic telepathy actually can induce different emotional states. Each part of the brain has different circuitry, different frequencies, different patterns. You can induce, you can mimic almost every illness and induce it. So when someone's classified, let's say, as manic depressive, we can do that. We can make them happy for a day and then make them depressed for a day. And then the doctor will prescribe certain drugs for them, which will then do more damage to their body. But you can see why the population can't know about this. Let's just say everything I said is true. It would be the breakdown of religion. It would be anarchy. There'd be no democracy. Everything. Well,
there are programs like this that have been declassified and been acknowledged by the government, like MK Ultra. They acknowledged that was real. Operation Northwoods.
Yeah,
they recognize that was a real thing. That was declassified. There's things that are sinister that the government has done that they admit to, but nothing happens. A lot of people don't even pay attention to it.
Right, until it happens to them, and then it's too late. No one will help them.
It seems like with MK Ultra, though, they were targeting more so prisoners. People that were in prison, big shot. And obviously when you think of MK Ultra, there's people like Ted Kaczynski, Charles Manson, who was the big mob guy, famous mob guy who killed a lot of people. I'm blanking on his name right now. But a lot of those people talked about how some of their contacts in the government, probation officers, were giving them LSD. That's a real thing.
Yeah, it's a real thing. It was on the masses. introduced to the United States and promoted. But you're talking about specific events such as in San Francisco where they put a one-way mirror up and had prostitutes.
That's that's Midnight Climax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Climax.
That's another one.
Yeah. And then Ted Kaczynski, he lived in my dorm at Harvard, not at the same time.
He was being experimented on in Harvard.
Yeah. And that was Project Moonstruck, I believe.
Project what?
Moonstruck.
Moonstruck. Okay.
Stress program.
That's a terrifying story.
Yeah, isn't it? And even the shooter in Vegas, he had FBI contacts, and that gets very murky. But the news never follows up on any of this. For example, I was in a suicide letter. The guy, Myron May, who shot up Florida State or University of Florida's library, like 10 years ago. Anyway, he didn't kill anybody, but he shot people, and then it was death by cop. He was a lawyer, trained there, a successful black man, and same symptoms of Len Ber. And his reasoning of why he shot up the school was he needed news publicity to make sure people understood this was real and was happening. And so he mentioned my name in it, but he never tried to contact me. But he gave out 7 packages in the mail, and the FBI intercepted them all to make sure none of the information was...
What were in these packages?
Just information. So they held on to it. The news stories sort of went away. People just were left, wonder why he did that. And then
what was this guy's name again?
Myron May.
Myron May.
Yeah.
And he clearly talked about having the same exact symptoms as Len.
Yeah.
Publicly.
Yeah. And he left a video testimony. And then people, the FBI eventually led it through to the senders, the packages, and they posted it on the internet. So you can find his testimony unless Google's taken it down, or YouTube or whatever. They don't want copycats, basically. So, oh yeah, there it is.
Oh, this is what is this, like a CNBC News? Scroll down, Austin.
Gunman's motives remain unclear. See, and that's a lie by the media.
Hours before he opened fire in Florida State University Library, lawyer Myron May left a desperate voicemail for an acquaintance with his plea: "I do not want to die in vain." The message was part of a flurry of emails, texts, and phone calls in which the former prosecutor laid bare his torment. He believed government stalkers were harassing him and using a direct energy weapon to hurt him. He said that he had sent packages to 10 people that would expose what he thought was happening to him. That's pretty scary.
Yeah, and maybe you remember the Navy Yards shooter. He used a sawed-off shotgun, actually killed, I think, 13 people. He had a clearance to get on a Navy base, and he wrote on his weapon, and the news pretends like they have no idea what's going on. My ELF weapon, that stands for extremely low frequency, which the brain operates on, which we also communicate with submarines with because it penetrates everything. So he was convinced the Navy was behind it, and he just wanted revenge. He couldn't point the finger to stop it, so he just took it out on everyone on the base. But it creates such frustration. A lot of these shooters are trying to get this media attention.
What is this, Austin? Oh, okay. What do you think it would take for the government to, or for anyone responsible to be transparent and open about this?
I don't think they can be, because think of the atrocities and the lack of trust. I mean, that would happen.
Lack of trust of the government.
Yeah, well, I mean, even more so that they're socially engineering, let's say, gun rights. Well, let's have all these spree killers go on shooting sprees, and then the response of that stimulus would be take away guns. It's a way to socially engineer. And so you say your government wouldn't do that. Well, they very much in long-term perspectives of how they want to shape the New World Order or shape a UN, a single government-controlled
A vast majority of, I mean, I'm not sure if it's all of them, but I know that a vast majority of these public shooters, these school shooters, they were on antidepressants and a slew of different pharmacology and pharmaceutical drugs to help them deal with depression, social anxiety, different things like that. Couldn't that be part of what is going on? I mean,
it could. I would have to see their private psychological profile. And I told you, just because they're on drugs doesn't mean anything to me. I have to interview them and see if they're being driven. It's called psychic driving. The Scottish world psychiatrist who did brainwashing, Montreal University, I'm trying to pull up his name in my files now. Anyway, he called it psychic driving, and these women would go into the hospital for mild depression. He would play a 2-tape loop, just like these other breakdown processes. Your mother hates you, blah, blah, blah. Now, I can't actually repeat how awful the scripts are they use. I compiled a list of 1,000 negative things they say, and I posted on Facebook and got away with it just because I put quotes around it.
And they use this to break down the ego?
Correct. And so they did that while they were in induced comas. I'm still talking about the brainwashing.
So they're unconscious.
Pseudo-unconscious.
Okay.
And they would keep them in a vegetative sort of sleep state.
Okay.
And I think it was probably in a delta or theta brainwave dominant state. So they could hear all this negativity. And I think they gave them LSD too. And they were just trying to and electroshock. So they were trying to wipe the brain clean so they could rebuild new memories. One woman, it was funded by the CIA. The psychiatrist got his funding from that. And the woman sued. She won. But she lost half her life. Can't remember it. Had to learn how to pee again, speak again, everything. So brainwashing works. The reprogramming part's what's interesting.
And just to make it absolutely clear, I do not have a diagnosis of paranoid or delusional disorder. I have a clean bill from my psychiatrist. The only thing that he suggested as a diagnosis is adjustment disorder, which means that I'm adjusting to this torture.
Well, at what point did you decide to see a psychiatrist?
Oh, at the very beginning, because I was actually hoping that it was a psychiatric disorder, because that way it can be treated, but it's not. This is, I had to educate my psychiatrist, but he's a very smart. Actually, every single one of my physicians that take care of me, neurologist, psychiatrist, primary care physician, and now Dr. Giordano in DC, who also confirmed, they're all on the same page. This is my diagnosis.
I just remembered the brainwashing doctor's name is Dr. Ewan Cameron.
Dr. Ewan Cameron,
yeah.
And he's Russian?
No, he was American Scottish.
American.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
This kind of funding goes on all the time, and we often do it in other countries. Long list of human experimentation by the National Institute of Health. And
I saw my neighbor this morning. My neighbor worked for Honeywell for over 35 years. He worked for Honeywell.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of briefly ran told him who I was talking to today on the podcast, and I talked about Havana syndrome. And he said, "Oh yeah." He goes, "That's 100% real." He's like, "I know we've worked on weapons like that, and so I know they work on those weapons at Raytheon." He said,
"Yeah, I can't talk about that, but yeah, he's right."
You can't talk about it.
Yeah.
But you can confirm that
I
he's
can
very...
confirm. I can confirm. That's all.
How, for people like you and your colleagues going to school, studying artificial intelligence, what percentage of you guys, are you guys, when you guys are doing that, or do you guys have aspirations to work for the military, work for the CIA, to be spies? Like what?
No, I was a scientist. Worked on advanced surveillance equipment and other things. As a scientist, you just want to be working on cutting edge science. You don't, and you believe you're doing your country a favor and eventually be used for good. And that's part of how you get funding from the Senate for billion-dollar projects, is you have to have dual purpose, one for civilian uses and one for military. And we don't really think of the implications for the negative part. We just want to work on new cutting-edge stuff. And it's also compartmentalized on the most part. So a lot of people don't know how they're putting together a bigger weapon system. They just work on a piece of it.
Isn't Facebook working on weren't they working on something called the empathy machine or something like that?
Something I think I talked about.
Yeah.
But yeah.
What is that?
That is, if you can induce these emotions, touch, torture, whatever, in a way, it's kind of a beautiful thing. If you have a partner and they say something that hurts their feelings, you say something that hurts their feelings, you get to feel how they're feeling, and vice versa. So if you punch someone, you're going to feel the same pain that they do. That's called the empathy machine. But now imagine if you go beyond 2 people. Let's go to 100 people. Every time someone stubs their toe, they all feel the same pain. It would feel like random torture to everybody. Well, who stubbed their toe?
I can see the first application, the most obvious thing I could see this thing going to is pornography.
Yes. They already have, sort of virtual machines for
Right. If they could somehow if you could buy a subscription to some sort of pornography and make every single guy watching this thing happen,
Okay, now I don't know what I'm allowed
this
to say.
This is already being used. If
you talk to the victims, the TIs, one of the worst breakdowns, and it's pretty common. I think I can say the word simulated rape. And forced orgasm.
You can say anything you want. This is the internet.
Okay. And so simulated orgasms and rape is extremely common, and especially violating for women. They complain about that torture breakdown the most. But you're right. What's the positive use?
Where is it the most lucrative? Where is it the most financially beneficial? Like, where can you make the most money in this thing? You think that would be the most obvious first?
That would be the first.
Yeah.
But think of the problem. It would have to be regulated, because we know the 7 pleasure centers of the brain. And let's just say we don't have to stick in electrodes. We use ultrasonic helmet like the University of Arizona is doing to target certain parts of the brain. You just sit there and press the button all day, over and over.
There's a story of a woman that what's the story? There was a story of a woman who was in the hospital. Something was wrong with her. You may know, but she had a button. And every time she pressed it, it made her orgasm. And she was just doing it and doing it and doing it until she was basically a vegetable. Yeah.
You eventually quit eating. You die. So the government would have to step in to regulate this somehow. I don't think a lot of my research just focuses on the negative. The tortured people, the targeted, the breakdown. They're the most vocal. They're the loudest. But there is a classification weapon system called the voice of God, and I've met some of these people.
A classified weapon system?
It's just the categorization called voice of God weapons. Anything you can make someone hear, believe it's God.
And these are real?
Yes.
These are publicly...
There's Newsweek wrote about them.
Okay.
So it's been out for a while.
Voice of God weapons.
Voice of God weapons.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
And so I've run into people randomly who believe they're talking to God. God doesn't have a voice, I don't think. I don't know what he sounds like, but they're convinced, and they'll do whatever this voice tells them. And that's the dangerous part. That's another form of trickery. God wants you to go on a killing spree, let's say. Some people would do that. You're one of God's army. So you can see how this broad swath all over the world, not only is it experimental, it could be very much a secret army of assassins. And so I call them programmed assassins. But the positive part, the voice of God, it worked in the Gulf Wars, Gulf War, when we said, Allah, lay down your arms. That's a voice of God weapon.
Okay. Is this, and you can't talk about, or can you talk about, this is something that you were involved with?
A little bit.
A little bit. Who was Dr. Is this something that Dr. Jose Delgado talked about? What, and who was he, and what specifically did he work on?
Dr.
Jose Delgado.
He was
Look
known,
him up, Austin.
He was known as the father of brain chips. And so he was from Yale University. And he did a lot of brain experimentation, stuff that is unethical and we wouldn't allow today per se. But we made progress of understanding the brain. He would actually wire up people. His most famous experiment was with a bull. He implanted bull with a radio frequency chip, and he could make a bull stop from charging by pressing a button. And that impressed everybody quite a bit.
Wow.
But that's using brain chips. And
where was he? Was he in the United States?
Yeah.
But you don't need chips anymore.
Okay, this is him with the bull.
Yeah, there he is.
Dr. Jose Delgado steps into the Spanish bull ring as a bold demonstration of his research.
A risky behavioral control demonstration.
Wow. And he was working with the government? He had a famous quote, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Let's see if you can bring up the quote. Mankind does not have a right to develop his own mind.
Austin, pull up his quote. So what was Delgado what did he do? Where was he working from? What was he working in one of the universities here?
Yes, he was working at Yale Medical School, and he would insert wires into people's brains. And, there's always two sides to the story.
Okay, here it is. Man does not have the right to develop his own mind. This kind of liberal orientation has great appeal. We must electrically control the brain. Someday, armies and generals will be in control by electrical stimulation of the brain.
And that was in the 60s, I believe.
Whoa. So that's heavy.
We've come a long way since.
Yeah, I mean, if people were openly talking about that in the 60s, where are we now? And where are other nations like China and Russia and Iran?
We boycotted recently like over 100 countries from doing companies in China because they were working on mind control technologies. So, it's very much out in the open. But it's just people don't want to recognize their soul, so to speak, can be touched. Their very ego, their sense of self can be altered. They're not in control of their own emotions. That means if you don't have free will or autonomy or choice, democracies don't exist. That means religions don't exist. That means a whole bunch of things. Markets can be shaped, moved up or down at will based on people's preferences. It's total domination of the world. That's how important and why it's kept so secret. I think it's the ultimate weapon, because if you can control the people with their fingers on nuclear weapons, you're one step ahead. So this is kind of the end game, is full control of the human mind.
And at scale.
at scale that's right, of the world.
It's kind of hard to even wrap my mind around.
It is. Something bigger than yourself is always hard to imagine. And so that's why the monkey brain experiments at Duke, we can't fathom what us vibration